We're down here in Franklin County, just below Roanoke, thick in the Blue Ridge, and we're going to show you all a little bit of history and a little bit about the still place. And I'm just going to kick it right over to Dad if we can get the slide up and talk some history.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That right there picture y'all looking at is my great grandmother and grandfather. And he was a big kingpin in the whiskey business back in the 30s, well through the 20s and 30s. And he made a whole lot of liquor and made a whole lot of music. He was just an interesting fellow. But there's a whole lot of them interesting fellows around here. But that interesting fellow just happened to be my grandpa. And so that being said, he got caught up in one of the biggest conspiracies to have to do with whiskey that this country's ever seen, I reckon. And it was here in the county, and it got national attention. And he wound up having to go pull federal prison time over all of their illicit activities. So that's that. And he was also an old-time fiddler. He played old-time music. And all that stuff kind of runs hand in hand. You know, we had to make our own whiskey around here and make our own music too. So he was into a little bit of both of them. But they wound up getting big trades when a lot of them around here would get caught making whiskey. They would send them off to prisons, and they would meet up with people from cities that were there for all kind of crimes and things, and they would wind up making connections, and that's how the liquor business got to be so big here in this county. They connected with people in cities and stuff away from here through pulling time, and wound up getting into it in a whole lot bigger way than the little Snuffy Smith type operations. And that's when they graduated up into the black pot type steels, which is a whole lot bigger type operation, and where you might use a lot of sugar and make just basically sugar whiskey. And these steels here that y'all looking at are black pot type steels, and that's an illegal operation there that was in the woods here in Franklin County, and it ain't no telling whose that was, and ain't no telling whether anybody got caught or not at that one. But I think we got this picture from the law. They give us some pictures of where they'd raided places and stuff. But anyway, the law, when they'd find a steel place like that, you know, and they would cut it up, and y'all can see a picture there of them where they've cut it up and all that mash running out on the ground, and they'd destroy it where it couldn't be used no more. And if they caught anybody, they'd carry them, lock them up, and they'd have to go through all that mess. But it was big business here, and it kept everybody busy, because you had people that were selling supplies to make the whiskey, and you had people that was making the whiskey, and you had people that was hauling the whiskey, and even down had people that was making the steels and stuff, you know. So everybody around in this, not everybody in this county, but the vast majority of people in this county were tied to the whiskey business some which way or another back many years ago. But it's about a thing of the past now, and that's the reason we got into it, because we wanted to shed a little light on a lot of what built this county and a lot of history here in this county, because it ain't no big industrious place, and these mountain folks had to do what they had to do to make a living. And so that's where it come into play. And that right there picture that y'all are looking at, that's a copper worm that they use. It's 2-inch copper pipe. Most of them for the black pot type steels are 60 foot long, and they're homemade. There was copper craftsmen here that just learned how to make what the whiskey makers needed. And so they wound up, you couldn't just go to your local hardware store and buy a copper coil 2 inches around, 60 foot long. So these folks, they would order copper flashing and sheets of copper, and would come in and they would cut it up into pieces and make their own pipe and roll them up and make their own worms for the bootleggers. And the people that was into that, they had a thriving business, because all the times that the law was catching them, first thing they do is cut up the caps and worms. And so they'd wind up having to go to the copper man and get him to make them another one. And this little steel right here is one that we got here in the tasting room, that it's just a little copper submarine type steel. It's more for making like pure grain corn whiskey and brandy and stuff of that nature. It ain't made for like the big production type outfits like what y'all see in these black pots. It's right here for making a craft spirit, and it was actually an illegal steel. A friend of mine had it, and he was about 80 years old, and and me and him used to work together a whole lot. And he told me if I wanted to put into my legal distilling operation, he'd let me have it so I could show the way of the woods. And that's the reason that I set that up like that, because that's the way that you would find one set up in the woods, you know, out here in these hills of Franklin County. And so right here, this picture here is a picture of our beer, our steel beer ferment. And I call it steel because it is beer. It's just a really strong beer, and it works and ferments. And then when it gets all done working and doing all that it does, you take and when it clears off, you pump it over in your still or pour it over in your still or whatever, and distill it and get all the alcohol out of it, and then put it back in your fermenters and sugar it back and work it off again. So that's a little bit about how the beer situation is. And right there that's some cornmeal that come out of that right there's already been cooked. And Anna, I reckon she got up a big handful of it to show you all about it. But we use locally grown corn here. I got a buddy of mine over in Callaway that grows corn and rye and wheat and all that stuff. And he grinds it up and sells it to us to make his whiskey. So we try to keep everything just as local as we can. That way to keep all the keep everything community oriented, I guess you could say. So that right there is what that is. And there's a picture of me and my nephew standing with a little copper still. I've been trying to show him about making liquor because it ain't no more liquor much being made around here. And I kind of caught the tail end of a dying breed of people. I was wild enough and crazy enough to fall right in there. And I guess you could say fortunate enough. I mean, because if I'd have got captured, I never would have been able to got into this here with whiskey business. So I wound up learning a whole lot from old timers that I was worked for a whole lot, and they taught me a lot about making liquor. So now I'm trying to hand it down to these kids in a more legitimate way, to where they ain't got to worry about getting caught. And I was lucky I never did. But anyway.
So now we're going to take you guys back and kind of show you our little copper sub here, just so you can get an actual live shot of what it looks like. Get my camera turned around here.
Yeah, this little steel here is the one I was telling y'all about that a friend of mine had. It was kind of under the ground. It was in a hole way back in the mountains, and I'd help him some, and we'd go there and we'd make corn whiskey and sometimes make brandy and stuff like that. And I brought it here and set it up, and it's just a little copper outfit, which is kind of high-end stuff, you know, when you're making the good stuff. And so that's what we use it for, to show people here at the tasting room how the way of the woods is. And this here is your copper cap. It was an old man by the name of Lincoln Gusler. He was a real well-known copper craftsman here in the county, and he made a lot of caps and worms and stuff for people. But if the law caught you with one of them without a license, which nobody around here had licenses, everybody was a bootleg. Anyway, they'd wind up cutting up your cap, your worm, your steel, and everything. But this is one of the pieces that I told y'all that the copper craftsman was stayed so busy making. It's a real work of art. About anybody could build old steel, but it really took somebody who knew what they was doing to build a cap or a worm. And that's when it fell back on the copper people, and they stayed busy in these parts making up caps and worms because the law was cutting them up just fast so they could put them up. Anyway, they never give up. They kept on trying.
Speaking of cutting them up.
Yeah, speaking of cutting them up, this is a little round copper steel that a friend of mine had, and the law, he wasn't even using it. He just had it hid in a pine patch, and they was up there looking for a big steel place, and they happened upon his little copper steel where he made his good stuff in, and they found it and cut it all to pieces. I've been ashamed to have done something like that. So something that is such a work of art. But anyway, they didn't have no remorse whatsoever for it. They'd cut them up just fast so they could get the axe on them. But anyway, I guess it didn't take me long to tell y'all what I knew.
So we're going to head up front now, and Joni, our tasting room manager, is going to show us a cocktail. It's a strawberry jamboree, and if you don't have moonshine or spirits, backwoods spirits as we call them, wherever you are, then you can use vodka or whatever you can get your hands on. It's pretty, you can use any kind of neutral spirit in it. So
Hello. First I started out and I made a syrup. I used some just freezer jam that I had at home using local strawberries. So you just put a little water and a little lemon juice and make a syrup out of that. It's over crushed ice. So I'm just putting the first sugar moonshine in. Then you can add your syrup. And then you just top with a club soda. And you have just a great summer drink that you can serve poolside.
And that's the strawberry jamboree.